My name is Claudette Anderson, and I am an owner-broker of a company out of Raleigh, North Carolina called eRealty. And in a market where a lot of agents are not even staying in the business because they don't know how to generate the leads, I've actually hired 3 people just this week. My conversion ratio so far is at 68%. I've actually had 10 closings from the leads that I started generating in June. So I am thrilled with this. It's the best in the market, and I am a satisfied customer.
Hi, my name is Matt Jones, and I'm the President and CEO of FavoriteAgent.com. In the previous sessions, we focused on how to gather an unending supply of listing leads. We discussed becoming the best agent for the job. We mentioned the necessity of learning market statistics and how and where to find them. We discussed how you can increase your credibility and power by arming yourself with this basic and relevant knowledge. Next, we determined the best way to build an accurate CMA or comparative market analysis. And then we touched on the theory behind my listing presentation. If you've been studying the information, you know how and why this presentation works. Now, in this, the 5th session of the series, I'll show you how to present my listing plan to a seller client. I'm going to ask you to watch with pen and paper in hand and to take notes. You should expect to watch it again and again until it's been fully absorbed. And if you do, I promise that you'll be listing properties at 8% or more every time. I want you to pretend that you're the listing agent in this story. It may not be true for you yet, but it could be true. And it's worked for me countless times. Imagine that it's a Thursday morning. You've just come into the office and noticed a CMA request that arrived from your website overnight. Along with it, so did 8 buyer leads. If you're like most agents, that kind of good news doesn't happen often, but in my case, not a day goes by that I don't receive 1 or 2 CMA requests from potential sellers and 15 to 20 buyer leads, and all because of the technology that I use to capture traffic from my website. But once again, I'm getting sidetracked. We've already talked about Lead Capture Gateway, the Lead Capture Gateway, the LCM, and how it's a critical piece of your arsenal for generating an endless supply of listing and buyer leads. For now, let's stick with the listing presentation. Okay, so it's Thursday morning. You have a new CMA request in your inbox. The first things you do are to pull up the tax value and print out the tax sheet, which will tell you a lot about the property and the CMA request. Using the tax records and the appreciation rates for that area, you determine the approximate value of the home. Next, you'll log into your MLS database and you pull up all the closed comparables for the seller subdivision with the approximate size and number of bedrooms and baths. There are 21 comparables to use and only one obvious distress sale, so you'll eliminate that one from the average. After finding an average for the other 20, you print out the comps in one-liner format and note the average price on the page. Next, you pull up all the active comparables listed in the MLS, 3 in this case, and you average those. You print out the query and you write down the average price. Now, add the 3 prices that you've written down and divide by 3. Obviously, this is your average sale price. Now multiply it by 5% and add that amount to the average to determine the high end of your reasonable range. Then subtract 5% from the average to give you the low end of the range. In a matter of minutes, you've completed a very thorough CMA that's beyond scrutiny. That's a good first step. So now you call the seller and you thank him for visiting your website. You tell him that you received his home valuation request and that you're in the process of compiling data to determine the home's value. I generally tell the seller that I've seen nice homes and bad homes as well, and some in the middle, and I'd like to know where really his home is. I ask him to pretend that I'm Stevie Wonder and to give me a verbal tour of his home, since I'm not actually there to view it. I allow him to take me from room to room, all the while asking him for specifics about the home's curb appeal and other possible attractions. After touring the house, we next go outside, where I have him talk me through the yard and the exterior paint and the roof and the overall condition, the immediate neighbors' homes, and the landscaping. Then I generally say something like, "Gosh, that sounds like a really nice house. Why on earth would you want to sell it?" Now, the response I get is very important because it can provide me with the seller's motivation and often his time frame. Trying to determine whether or not the seller has a realistic grasp of the situation, I then ask him if he has any idea what price should go on the house. Sometimes sellers aren't completely practical about these things. I bet you already knew that. But generally they are. And if a seller isn't a realist, he'll likely believe that his home is worth much more than the initial CMA would indicate. So then I proceed with something like this. "Wow, Mr. Seller, you must have a really nice house. I'm looking at every single home that's been sold in your neighborhood during the last year, and I'm not seeing anything within $15,000 at that price. Help me understand what features your home has that makes it stand out so much." Now, many times he'll tell me that the house down the street sold for that much, even though it isn't nearly as nice as his. Generally, however, the seller down the street just didn't want anyone to know that he had to sell his house for much less than what he'd been asking. But now that you have the comps in your hand, you can tell the seller exactly what a house sold for. And sometimes that fact is all you need to introduce some reality into the situation. On the other hand, sometimes your potential client's home actually is worth much more than you would have expected. So you also need to be open to what he tells you. On those rare occasions, you should be prepared to tweak your CMA a little. Now that you know the seller's motivation, his time frame, and his opinion of the property's value, it could even be that he had a recent appraisal, which he's now using to test you, you can tell him that you'll complete your research and then call him back with your valuation. Simply set up an appointment and either call or visit in person. Now, what about taking listings over the phone? Yes, you heard right. In fact, I've taken roughly 85% of all my listings over the phone. And you can do the same thing with this approach. Okay, so you have the listing appointment and the information you need going in. You've got the value of the home, the seller's motivation, his time frame, and his expectations. And besides having the CMA and the market data close at hand, you also have the home buyer notebook we talked about in the previous session. Now, more on this in a moment. Now, however, it's time to nail the presentation. Before we get into the actual interchange, though, let's talk about what the seller is expecting and what virtually every other agent is gearing up to giving. The seller is expecting you to come in and tell him how great his house looks. He's expecting you to tell him how terrific your company is, and it may be. He's expecting you to tell him how great an agent you are and how many zillion dollars worth of properties you've sold. He's expecting you to tell him his kids are cute. He's expecting you to tell him he needs to fix this and that. He probably sold a house before, and he's already talked to a realtor, and or he's talked to friends who have gone through that process. So let's assume that he plans to interview several agents, as many sellers are nowadays doing. The single most powerful thing you can do is surprise him. Remember, you want to look at what everyone else is doing and then do the exact opposite. What do I mean? Other agents will talk about themselves. You need to talk about the seller. Other agents will extol the virtues of their companies, and in nebulous terms, they'll explain how they plan to sell the house. You need to talk about different strategies for selling the house, and then show the seller exactly what the process will mean to him in terms of days on market and selling price. Well, my time's run out for this video. In the second half of this session, I'll finish telling you exactly how you should go about doing the listing presentation, so I won't leave you hanging.